Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Thursday, July 30th, 2026, episode 560. And we're going to talk about a bunch of things, but tying it all to this expression, freedom isn't free. Now, freedom isn't free is something that you hear a lot in the United States. And when people say it, it generally is in the context of telling people, hey, these luxuries, these freedoms that you're able to enjoy, the freedom to protest, the freedom to not stand during the Pledge of Allegiance or whatever national anthem, they come at a price. And usually it's an invisible price that is unconsidered or forgotten by a lot of people. And that price was paid by the military. So you had soldiers die on the battlefield so that we can enjoy freedom here in the United States. And that basically is how it goes. So pay respect to people in uniform in the military because they helped you be able to enjoy the kind of freedom that we have or had in the United States. Now, this expression was credited to a Colonel Walter Hitchcock, and I Googled him, and I could, and after 2 pages of trying to find out who this guy was, and I just kept getting all these links that pointed to the same article, some local article that mentioned him, and so that's my policy. I only go through 2 pages of Google results unless it's something I really need to know, but otherwise I just move on. But anyway, AI says that rights must be actively fought for and defended rather than be expected or given. And that means we have duties, not to do harm to restore our freedoms, but rather to vote and obey laws. And I thought that was funny. I giggled a little bit that AI, and we all know that AI programmers have a political agenda. And so there it says, yeah, freedom isn't free. So you don't do any harm, but vote and obey your laws. Well, if the laws are already corrupt and all of the people that you're potentially going to vote for are part of the system and are also corrupt, yeah, you're not getting out of it by voting. You're not going to sort of preserve the idea that freedom isn't free by obeying corrupt laws. It just, it doesn't happen that way. And I thought AI did that little neat trick that if I was, 16 again, I would totally say, yeah, yeah, this is what you got to do. You got to vote. You got to obey your law. Actually, maybe not 16, maybe 10 years old, because by the time I was 16, I was really skeptical about a lot of that stuff. Anyway, so the mantra for the general public can have legitimacy if one believes that all the wars overseas were legitimate, right? So all these soldiers, they fought and died for a good cause. But were they? And I know I said before once in an episode that I said this during a lecture, and this girl just started bawling. She just started crying, tears just, and then she just ran out of the room. And I never saw her again. And I suppose that that person had a loved one die in one of these stupid wars. But the only way that she could come to terms with it and cope with it is to tell herself that he died for a good cause. And that day, I was saying how the government lied us into all of these conflicts and that all these people didn't have to die. And maybe their lives were wasted for the preservation of corruption or for the preservation of empire. So there's the thing. All these wars perhaps are suspect. There were alternatives. We didn't have to waste all this human life. And I've talked about this before. I won't go into depth too much, but just even very simply, Woodrow Wilson lying the United States into World War One. And if the United States did not get involved in World War One, then there would probably not have been a World War Two. And if there was no World War Two, there would not have been a NATO, there wouldn't have been a Cold War, blah, blah, blah. And so the world would look pretty different if the US didn't get involved in World War One. So it's all speculation, it's all conjecture, it's all what ifs, but interesting to think about that pattern of lying the American people into war has not changed. And that's something that we should keep in mind there. Then I saw a post, right? So, there's this freedom isn't free, thought about doing an episode. Then I saw this post. about the Battle of Athens. And this was not something that happened in Greece, in Europe. Rather, it was in 1946, August 1946, in the United States, in Georgia, Athens, Georgia. And basically, what it is in 1946 is after World War II, all these veterans they came home, and what they found was a corrupt local government. And so then they did their thing. They said, okay, we'll just vote our way out of this. And so everyone was going to show up to vote these guys out, vote the bums out. And of course, the bums, the corrupt officials, hired a bunch of thugs to harass people, um, uh, prevent people from exercising their right to vote. And then finally, taking all of the ballot boxes and then saying that they're going to count them in secret. Well, of course, all of these guys, they said, no, we're not going to stand for this. They got all their weapons from the local armory, National Guard armory, and they went after these corrupt officials. And so there was a gun battle. I don't know what the casualties, if there were, but there had to have been. And after a very long standoff, finally they surrendered. The politicians surrendered, and the votes were counted. And it turns out that they lost the election, right? All the corrupt officials, they were replaced. So that's interesting because freedom isn't free, right? That was the tagline, freedom isn't free. And then they talk about a battle that happened here in the United States. So the opponents of freedom are not necessarily just overseas. They're here in the United States. They're all over the United States, if I were to insert here, right? And so the fact that freedom isn't free, most people think of overseas, makes me feel like it's just a recruitment ploy. People say it now to get people to join the military, because we got to protect freedom here by fighting over there, where the real fight is actually here in the United States. It's everywhere, all over the United States. Why go overseas to fight fascism when it's right here? So I used to joke about, when are we going to invade Canada? And people would look at me like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, they're fascists up there, right? Especially when Zelensky went to visit Canada and they dug up this old Nazi from World War II who is Ukrainian, who's living in Canada. That's a story too. I talked about the Hunka, I think it was his name. I did an episode on it. But why are these Nazis here in Canada, right? So, but they honored him because he fought against the Russians in World War II. And people didn't think about that for a second, right? The Russians at the time were the allies of the United States, which means they were fighting with the Germans, who were the Nazis, right? And so that's who they honored in Canada. So basically, fascism has taken over Canada. Why aren't we invading Canada? What about New York City? Because clearly there's a fascist there now. I talked about him yesterday. Mamdani, a socialist, a communist. That's a fascist right there. So why aren't we invading New York City? And so basically, all of that corruption, all of the anti-freedom forces are already here all over the United States, and people are totally fine with it. It's only if it's overseas, that's when we have to do something about it, right? That's so hypocritical. It's depressing, really. And that's why I have to laugh, because it's just so sad. And I don't like to be sad. So the enemies, once again, they are here, not necessarily over there. I mean, they may be over there, but how do we know we're fighting against the right people? Right. And so what I'm trying to say here is that it's human nature to be evil, to do evil things, because all of us are susceptible to temptation. Each of us, we have different temptations, and we're not all the same. Not everyone is weak to money. Not all of us are weak to power. Some people don't care about power, but they love money, right? So everyone is different. And it's not limited to power and money. Obviously, there are lots of other temptations out there, as many as there are people. And so it's human nature to be vulnerable to evil, and there are lots of different ways to be vulnerable to evil. And so perhaps we should stay out of all of foreign affairs, right? Mind your own business. Take care of the things at home. That's China's argument whenever U.S. ambassadors go over to China, they're like, don't talk to us about our domestic affairs. You clean up your mess first, and maybe we can think about it, but think about talking about it. But nah, we're not going to talk about what you think we're doing wrong over here when clearly your society is far more messed up than ours. And they're right. We have so much corruption and evil in the local, state, and federal levels that who are we to talk about any other country? It's just kind of so massively hypocritical. It's just it boggles the mind, really. And for us to get involved overseas, it's just an invitation for more corruption overseas. Like I said, how do you know that we're helping the right people? And think about it too, and I've talked about this before. In Afghanistan, for example, you bomb everything in Afghanistan that's worth $2. You bomb it, so it no longer is existence. You have impoverished the entire country, especially whatever was left over after the Russians were there. The United States goes in there, bombs the rest of it, right? And then says, "Hey, so now you're free." Who wants to help us to rebuild your country? Right? So, okay, you came in here. I don't know who you are. You killed my family, and now you're asking me to help you, who murdered my family, help rebuild this country when that's what I was doing before you got here. None of it makes any sense. But who would help the Americans after something like that? Well, that would be the most evil, the most corrupt, the most despicable, disgusting people of society are the ones that are going to step up and help the Americans, right? Who are going to get the most amount of power. Yeah, obviously there are other people who say, well, you know what? I'll just, good, innocent, naive people, they're going to try to help rebuild the country because that's what you got to do anyway. So why not do it with the help of the people who just bombed everything? But the people who are truly going to rise to the highest levels of power are the most despicable and disgusting people, right? Well, the rest of society, they hate me anyway, so why not get rich while being hated? And that is who the United States generally helps overseas. That's the government that the United States props up on all of these countries overseas, right? The most corrupt of that society who will bend over backwards for the United States so they can pretend to be a democratically elected government while they allow the United States, US corporations to come in and plunder anything and everything of value from that country. And that is what the United States does. That's why Ukraine was the most corrupt country in all of Europe before this war broke out. That's what they were trying to do with Russia, which is why we have Putin in power there, right? He ousted all of these corrupt officials who were also friends of the United States, who were friends of all those insiders in the United States. So they're upset. Why did Putin kill him? Putin is so evil because he murdered all these people. Well, yeah, because they were destroying that country. And since those corrupt people were in charge of the media, they control the narrative. And so therefore everyone hates Russia. We did that in Afghanistan, Iraq, trying to do that in Iran, etc. The list goes on. Also, Haiti. Why is Haiti forever poor? Well, because the U.S. props up the corrupt government down there as well. Uh, and they do that in weird ways. So evil is everywhere. We should stay out of overseas entanglements because we have enough problems here in the United States. Um, so the trick or the deception of the government is to make their war our war. I said that yesterday, right? I'm pretty sure I said that yesterday. And so their agenda, their concerns should be our concerns. But no, that it's not true. It's a lie. And of course, that's what they have to do to persuade us, to convince us, to trick us, to deceive us into fighting their wars for them. That's why all these warmongers, these neocons, they never go fight themselves. All those stand for Ukraine people, I can stick my flag, let's stick the Ukrainian flag in my profile. Yeah, it doesn't cost me anything, but don't ask me to go fight there. That's not my job. I've done my part, right? I put my flag in my profile picture. I've done my part, right? Freedom isn't free. Rah, rah, rah. So disgusting. Anyway, now, what needs to be done to get rid of all this corruption here in the United States? Well, it can get pretty violent, but it's only going to be really, really violent because it's gone on for way too long. If things had been able to be nipped in the bud, then penalties would not even be that great. The atrocities they commit would not be that bad. But because it's gone on for so long, it's the atrocities are just piling up. And when I include atrocity here, raising taxes so high that people can't pay the property tax any longer and they're kicked out of their homes. Real estate taxes that at first sign that someone is a little late on paying it, you kick them out and sell their properties. Ridiculous things like this, right? It's gotten this bad because people have been so ignorant for too long. All right. What do you need? Too many people benefit from the system. And so now when you try to have a insurrection, when you try to have a rising up of the oppressed, there are a lot of people on the other side because there are so many people who now benefit from the system. And a lot of people have said that. You try to get as many people as you can dependent on the system. So now they're going to fight to protect that system. It's a cycle, right? It always happens. It's unavoidable. And so therefore, this is why freedom of speech is so important. Diverse education is so important. And I would even go so far as to say one of the reasons why I was laid off from university was because I brought in a different perspective, which really upset the people who controlled my contract. More on that later. And so education is extremely important and should never be in the hands of the state. Speaking of the state, debasification is something that has been going on recently. The US used to have bases all over, like, I don't know, 100 bases around Iran, and now they're all gone. Um, Bases had to be slowly for operations for military strikes against Iran. They had to be placed farther. The ones that are used are further and further away from Iran because, as I said before, the U.S. has no defense. They have no way of shooting down incoming missiles and drones. Have absolutely no defense at all. Right? There is no Iron Dome. It's always been a myth. Uh, Propped up with false statistics and lies, basically. And it's so bad now that because especially if you have a base in your country and US bases are bomb magnets, they attract all these bombs from Iran. Well, the people there rise up and they say, no, 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 you can't have your base here any longer. And so the only place left is Israel. And Israel doesn't want it there either because it's just going to attract all these bombs. So basically, um, more and more of the world is becoming anti-American. And also this freedom isn't free mantra that has been so frequently invoked, especially recently here in the US, has been abused. We haven't been paying for freedom. We haven't been fighting for freedom. We've been paying and fighting for empire. Not for freedom, right? For certain people in this country to benefit from all the killing and uh, you know, pillaging, plundering overseas. That's what we've been paying for. And finally, let's update everyone on the Fauci trial. If you haven't been following, I don't know how you can't. It's hard to avoid it. It's everywhere. But this is the way it goes, right? This is my commentary on it. This is how it goes. They benefit hand over fist, as per his diary. He loved it when he was, basking in his fame. And then when he's put on the spot, he pleads the fifth. Like I invoke my right to remain silent. And what's interesting is that all of his supporters, or a lot of his supporters, like I haven't seen much of anything on social media saying, "Oh, he's being unfairly questioned," right? Because it's a difficult position to maintain that he's so innocent. But I remember all those people who criticized me 6 years ago when I said, "Hey, this is all just, it's just really sus. I don't think it is what it is. It's very suspicious. I think there's something else going on." And people came after me. And then when we were allowed back in the schools and I had to lecture in person, I started coming up with all these workarounds so that I could lecture the way I wanted to, not according to these rules, but still fulfilling the rules, but creatively. I got reprimanded, and that reprimand was later used as a part of the argument to not renew my contract, all that stuff. And so, yeah, I'm really upset at Fauci and all the things that people uh, did during the lockdowns, like all those power hungry people who use this as use that lockdown and the whole corona cervasis scare to seize power and oppress everybody else. Yeah, yeah, I'm really upset. And, you know, yeah, I want accountability. I want justice. But one thing that we have to realize is that political influence is the strongest privilege here in the United States. And so much so that the law can't touch you, right? This is better than so-called white privilege, uh, political privilege. And political privilege is made possible by dollar privilege, right? And so in that kind of game, if you're a player, then you're protected. If you step out, right? If you try to blow the whistle, you push back against, then you are punished. That's the way the game goes. And as long as the dollar maintains its power, this game will go on. And then all of the artificial enemies of this game, right, like the Mamdanis of the world, they benefit from it too. It's unfortunate that so many people are so ignorant of basic economics, basic morality, that more and more people are agreeing with the whole Mamdani approach to the world. It's socialism, fascism that's about to fail again. Now, would argue that Fauci was just simply a cog in a much bigger machine, that he provided the excuse needed to bail out banks. And so some people who in the financial sector would say that if you go back, the banks were on the verge of a global crisis. And so they had to lock down everyone to rescue the banks. And coincidental with the lockdowns was a tremendous amount of money printing, and all of that money printing was for the benefit of the banks. So that little bribe that was given to Americans was to hide and distract people from not noticing all of the big bailouts for corporations and banks. Now, something for us to note is that people are paid. People within the system are paid to think about day and night how to keep this game going. And when the Federal Reserve, is printing dollars, and these days it's so easy to do it. If the Fed is printing your budget, then anything becomes possible. War? Sure, why not? Lock down the world? Sure, why not? Right? And so we have allowed ourselves to be enslaved with expressions like freedom isn't free. That's it for this episode. I'll talk to you guys next time.